What's up, Awesemo? PeteyMac, Greg Ehrenberg. We've got Tyler producing today as we get set for a big Tuesday slate. 14 games on the docket today. And I'm working from the Florida office. This is my father-in-law's man cave. Should be doing a NASCAR show from in here, I think.
Yeah, I mean, well, you got enough cars on the wall. Like he's into the. It does kind of look like my dad's garage. Like the background, it's the same sort of stuff that he would have up there.
I dig it though. When I was watching TV in here the other day, and with the way it connects, it actually says man cave. I was like, all right, like going all in with that. So making that happen. I gotta set that up at home. All I have is that like fake fireplace thing and a couple of hats. I gotta step up my game in my place one day.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some like pictures up on the wall here, but also I'm moving soon. Yeah, once I move, I'll have more of a better setup. Right now, it's just that it is what it is. What do I care?
Are you going to put some Garrett Cole photos on the wall? He was not a favorite yesterday.
No, yesterday we were talking about this a little before we started. Yesterday was my worst slate of the year overall, not just from a DFS standpoint, but also betting standpoint, because when Taijuan Walker got hurt, and it was news, if you were watching the game, you knew before this was like public information that was out on Twitter, is that Taijuan Walker got hurt during the game for the Mets. He wasn't coming on. By the way, apparently he's been hurt for a while, and that's why he's had these weird at bats where there's been runners on base. He's not even trying to bunt. He just stands there and watches three fastballs go by him right down the middle. But yeah, so apparently he's been battling an oblique injury for a little bit of a couple of starts at least at this point, and he got hurt yesterday. He was coming out of the game. You could see him if you were watching the game. He's talking to the training staff in the dugout. He's talking to the manager. He walks into the clubhouse. You go, all right, Taijuan Walker's done. The Mets have their bullpen up and warming. So I go, all right, here's a good tip I have here. I'm watching the game. I know what's going on. He's coming out of the game. I look at the Braves' live run total is 2 runs. And I'm going, all right, the Braves have 5 innings left. They're going to be going up against the Mets, not the greatest bullpen in the world. They're going to be going up against some long relievers. I'm like, that over 2 runs, I was like, that's got to be great value. And then they end up losing 3-1.
Sean Reed Foley, man. I mean, he's got a name like a pro wrestler, and going out there and was able to shut down the Braves for most of the way. But we appreciate you joining us here. Make sure to like, subscribe our shows here on YouTube on the Awesemo channel. And remember, if you can't watch the shows on Awesemo, it doesn't mean you're locked out for the day. Almost all of our Awesemo YouTube shows are available through the Awesemo Podcast Network. There's a podcast for every sport. It's available on every major platform. So head on over to awesemo.com/podcast. And if you leave a 5-star rating and review one of our podcasts with your Twitter handle or email address, you'll also be eligible to win a free week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. 5 stars, little review, leave some info so we can track you down. One winner is awarded every Friday, and reviews to be eligible to win for up to 1 year. So big picture on this Tuesday slate. Again, 14 games, no Coors Field. You do have some weather issues in Minnesota, Chicago, Kansas City. Those would be the kind of things you got to keep an eye on throughout the day. And what I find interesting, Greg, is there's really no clear-cut ace pitcher. Got to have, last night it was Garrett Cole or Yu Darvish to some degree. Darvish won out, but that's not the way it sets up today.
No, it's totally different. I mean, we do have Blake Snell on tonight's slate, and at least his Draftkings price at 8,900, where we need to roster 2 starting pitchers. That's pretty obvious. On Fanduel, he's 8,000 on a single pitcher site. So a lot of ownership going to Blake Snell right now, and I think it's once again justified. Hopefully it goes a little bit better than the Garrett Cole. With that said, I'm actually, in general, I have a little more confidence in Garrett Cole than Blake Snell, just because Snell hasn't worked super deep into a lot of games, but favorable matchup against the Rockies. And I think he's definitely going to be somebody to build around for today. And in general, there aren't that many pitchers to pay up for, at least at the extent we had yesterday. So, I mean, we have, Lance Lynn, we have Christian Javier, but this is a far cry from when we have, Garrett Cole and Yu Darvish from yesterday.
I will start with the Marlins and the Phillies. Zach Wheeler, pretty good, not in that 1A kind of ace group, but look, he's striking out more batters than he ever has over the course of his career. 9.4 strikeouts per 9 innings. He has been hit or miss over the course of this year. 3 times he's been above 35 points on DraftKings, 5 times below 19. Never in that spot in the middle. So a little boomer bust with Zach Wheeler against this Miami Marlins lineup.
Yeah, and Wheeler's kind of a hard one for me to peg down just because he's been a guy who, for, the vast majority of his career, he's been a good real-life pitcher, but not quite as good of a fantasy pitcher because he's never been much of a strikeout guy. But that hasn't been the case this year. He's not necessarily striking out everybody, but striking out over a hitter per inning. That has granted him a little bit more upside. He's also throwing the ball harder than he ever has. He's always been a hard thrower, but now even more so than ever. He is 97.5 average mile per hour fastball velocity, which is by far the hardest of his career. So not exactly sure what to make of that, other than that it makes sense that the strikeouts would be a little bit up with that number, with that information as well. But Zach Wheeler on a slate where overall we don't have that many great high-end pitching options. I think he's maybe a little bit overpriced at $10K on DraftKings, and on FanDuel at 10,400 is definitely a little bit of a steeper price than I'd be willing to pay for him. But I mean, overall, we do him with the second best odds being the top scoring pitcher on the slate behind Blake Snell, maybe going a little bit over-owned at the moment. I definitely prioritize Snell and Woodruff over Wheeler, but Wheeler's somebody who will be in my player pool, just not quite as much as the field has him.
And the Marlins, we don't know exactly who they're going to throw out there in this game. Look, Philadelphia is a ballpark where it'll jump a little bit. Do you anticipate having some Phillies bats tonight and try to take advantage of what the Marlins might have up their sleeve?
It's hard to say until I know who's starting for the Marlins. Yeah. It's like, what am I going? Is it a righty? Is it a lefty? Is it a bullpen game? Is it somebody who's good? Is it somebody who sucks? I mean, I assume I've said this before, but when a team has a named a starting pitcher, I don't all of a sudden expect, Cy Young to walk through the door and be like, oh, look, we have all of a sudden one of the best pitchers in baseball starting. That's obviously not going to be the case. So it's either going to be a mediocre or below average starting pitcher, or like you said, potentially bullpen game. But definitely whether it's a lefty or righty and what the actual quality of that pitcher is going to make a big difference. But it seems like this could be a good spot for the Phillies, but who knows until we get more info.
Yeah, more on this game throughout the day, and the next baseball show coming up at 3:00 Eastern time. So we'll jump ahead to Tampa Bay, Baltimore. Luis Patino against Matt Harvey. Now, Patino, he's topped out at 65 pitches in 4 innings. The Rays, they're careful with their pitchers and bring them around. So he's building, though. It was those 65 pitches last time out. There's really not a ton of upside if he's going to go a max of 6 innings and 80 pitches or something. But what do you make of Patino in this spot against Baltimore?
Yeah, so I think the other thing to consider, too, is with the limited pitches he's throwing, he's kind of been lucky to even work as deep into the games as he has been going. So this is something where I'm certainly going to be looking out for beat reporters to see what kind of an update do we get on Patino, because if he does actually end up being, totally unleashed and going a full go, I mean, he's $5,900 on DraftKings as a potential SP2. He's obviously a very well-regarded pitching prospect overall in baseball. He's one of the top pitching prospects. Fangraphs has him ranked as the 11th overall prospect in baseball, and he's had success when he's been on the mound. He has a 1.54 ERA this year, a 3.06 expected ERA. He's striking out over 10 hitters per 9 innings. It just becomes a question of what does that pitch count look like? If he's going to throw 60 to 70 pitches, I don't really want to roster him. But if we find out that he's going to be allowed to throw, 80, 90 pitches, I don't think 100 plus is on the table. But if we're looking at 80 to 90 pitches in 6+ innings, then for sure, I think Patino is a good option as an SP2. I just don't think it's the most likely scenario right now. No. So at least in my current build, I don't have him in. But if I see anything from a beat reporter that suggests he's going to work deeper into games, then he becomes one of the stronger value options as far as pitchers go.
I would think if they took him out, if he's throwing decent last time out and they pulled him after 65 pitches, I mean, you're probably looking at a max of 80. And look, 80 pitches, I mean, you're lucky to get 5 innings. And they got to be 5 really good innings in order to have that work out. So even if they are going to push him a little bit, it's tough, though. Again, that price will at least put him somewhat in play. But then Matt Harvey is on the other side. Now, he had his big return to Citi Field last week, and the Mets absolutely pounded him. Otherwise, he's been okay. Not a whole lot of upside. Only 1 start where he's gone over 13 DraftKings points this year. I don't think there's much reason to be jumping on the Harvey train today against Tampa.
No, and Tampa Bay, by far the most popular offense of the day right now. So that is definitely something to monitor right now. We have them projected for 16% ownership as a stack, which that is a massive amount of ownership for a 14-game slate. We don't have another offense today projected for more than 8% ownership right now. So we're looking at the Rays coming with more than double the ownership of any other team on the slate. And for sure, this is a good matchup against Matt Harvey, right? Harvey was absolutely terrible last year. He's been a little bit better this year. He's a 4.81 ERA, a 4.5 expected ERA. But I think it says a lot that we look at Matt Harvey with a 4.81 ERA and be like, oh my God, I can't believe he's pitching that well. Matt Harvey with an ERA, like an ERA around 5. This is ridiculous. Matt Harvey is performing way over his head. Zips does have him projected for a 5.59 ERA for the rest of the season. His ERA for the last 2 years coming into this year, 7.09 ERA in 2019, like I said, 11.57 ERA in 2020. So everything would indicate that Matt Harvey's probably going to be pretty poor going forward. The issue just becomes the ownership on the Rays, who, while we do have them projected with the best odds on the slate of being the top stack, we're looking at 9% odds being the top scoring team on the slate, but a 16% ownership share. So as uncomfortable as it might sound at those current numbers, I wouldn't really have interest in the Rays, just because even though it's a good matchup, I don't think that the ownership justifies what their upside actually is.
No, it's not great in DFS when you're competing against other people. If everybody knows, hey, this is the top scoring team of the night, this is where you want to pound it, and they do, which the Top Stacks tool will tell you all about at Awesemo.com. And as far as the free content on the website today, you've got the MLB Big Board. You also have MLB ownership rankings free today, and beyond baseball, PGA ownership, NHL player and stack rankings, as well as we this is kind of a nutty time. If you play multiple sports and are balancing these things, you've got the PGA Championship this week starting on Thursday. You've got the NBA postseason. We can't call it playoffs, right? This play-in stuff starting up tonight. You got NHL playoffs going on at the same time. I mean, it's nuts right now after kind of a calm night last night where it was just the baseball.
Yeah, it's just play-in tournament. I mean, the NBA award ballots were already submitted on Monday. That's something that's been a big focus of mine on Twitter. I've been going back and forth with a bunch of dunderheads about that. But also, yeah, I mean, the NBA, so it's not quite the playoffs, but maybe it is. Just the play-in tournament. I guess it's its own thing, right? It's kind of the in-between.
It's a postseason, though, right? Can we call it a postseason? But it's not the playoffs. Like, it's you made it past the regular season, but you're not in the playoffs. And then it all gets a little confusing. But I'll say, for as criticized as it's been, it's actually been fun, right? Like, actually making the Lakers play meaningful games to try to get a 6th seed in the West. I think that's fun. And now, look, you get this great game tomorrow night with the Lakers and the Warriors. So I think it'll be a success when it's all said and done. It's just a little complicated.
Yeah, it's like purgatory, right? It's just that in-between space. It's not quite the playoffs. It's not quite the regular season, something in between. I love the play-in tournament personally. I think it adds a lot of intrigue. It also, not that it eliminated tanking, because it was obviously egregious at the end of the NBA regular season, but I do think we had less teams going out and just making ridiculous lineup decisions that we had seen in previous years, because we did have a handful of teams that were still competing for something to play for, right up until the end.
And like I say, even the good teams, they want to stay in that top 6. So you're not going to manage the load as much down the stretch. So I think it's a good thing. All right, next game, Mets Braves, or what's left of the Mets at this point. It's like every day 2 guys are out. Michael Conforto, Jeff McNeil, hamstring injuries Sunday, and then Taijuan Walker, as we talked about, hurt last night. And Kevin Pillar was hit by a pitch in the face. I still haven't seen the video. I don't think I want to see the video from what I saw in the reaction to it, but the Mets announcing this morning some nasal fractures for Pillar, so he's going to see a doctor, get that figured out. So I don't know what you're looking at in the Mets lineup at this point. It might be Jonathan VR hitting cleanup for them, but it's Tucker Davidson making the start for Atlanta. We don't know who the Mets are going to start. Joey Lucchesi is one of the options. He was awful this weekend against Tampa Bay, and that was just a couple of days ago. So, runs might be on the table in this game if these teams can manage to stay healthy. Even Ronald Acuna Jr. doesn't look right. Yeah,
I mean, Ronald Acuna Jr. has been injured, 3 times now over the last 2 weeks. He had the ankle injury. He had some oblique tightness, and then he also rolled his ankle running to first base. So it hasn't really forced him to miss an extended period of time. He's missed half of games. He had like 2 or 3 games where he just wasn't in the starting lineup. But I agree. I mean, that's a lot of stuff that he's dealing with at the same time, and it seems unlikely to be 100% right now. But we can't say anything much different from the Mets, who's dealing with more injuries than the Mets right now, although still find themselves at the top of the NL East right now. But I don't know what to make of Tucker Davidson, kind of a non-prospect in the Braves organization, 25 years old, mediocre success based on what is available from his minor league numbers. If you look at his Zips projection for this year, they have him projected for a 4.44 ERA, so it just seems middle of the road. And then I look at his price point on DraftKings, and he's $4,000. And when you consider all of the injuries that the Mets are dealing with right now, we actually have Tucker Davidson project with a 38% chance to be one of the top value pitchers on the slate. He's picking up less than 1% ownership. Given how banged up the Mets are, I don't think it's that crazy to say like, hey, this guy Tucker Davidson, maybe he goes out, pitches 6 innings, strikes out 4 guys, gives up 2 or 3 runs, puts up, like 14, 15 DraftKings points. For that kind of price point, I'm interested. Certainly if he's going to be less than 1% owned heading into lock. So given how banged up the Mets are, I think that he's somebody to take a flyer on in tournaments.
And then, the other thing tonight, we mentioned that there aren't a lot of high-priced aces. You're not paying up for a ton of pitching tonight, at least not on DraftKings. Woodruff's over 10,000. Wheeler's exactly 10,000. And then even the top hitters, Ronald Acuna Jr. has been banged up. So do you want to play him if he's not 100% at 6,300? Mike Trout may not play tonight after he hurt his calf yesterday. He's at 6,100. I mean, you still have Aaron Judge, Mookie Betts. You have guys to spend up for here, but not a ton. It's not like you want to save a bunch of money in order to pop in a Garrett Cole or pop in a Mike Trout in your lineup. So does that take away some of the intrigue of starting someone like Davidson, who might be a great value, but what are you doing with the rest of that money?
Yeah, I mean, I think if what I'd be doing with that money is I'm paying up for one of the offenses that we have that are not picking up a lot of ownership just because they're expensive. Maybe like the Toronto Blue Jays, who are only picking up 4% ownership as a team because they're fairly expensive. Maybe paying up for the Red Sox, we're only picking up 2% ownership as a team because they're fairly expensive. So I don't think there's a massive opportunity cost in terms of going cheap at pitcher, because like you said, when there is no Garrett Cole, there is no Yu Darvish on this particular slate, I don't really feel like I'm missing out on something by going with a cheap starting pitcher. And I think this could be a good slate to pay up for offenses, especially pay up for an offense to differentiate a little bit from the chalk that's coming in on the Rays. So it's not like Tucker Davidson, I look at him as some, crazy good play, but once again, he's picking up less than 1% ownership. If you're playing multiple lineups and you have him in 5%, right now you're like 10x the field on Tucker Davidson. So, I mean, put him in one of 20 lineups, and I think that you're in a pretty good position relative to ownership with the contrarian play.
How are the stacks looking in this game?
So here's the issue with the Mets are probably a team I'm just not going to have interest in for the time being, just because they have so many injuries they're dealing with that. And they are projected to be one of the more popular teams on the slate right now with 7.1% projected ownership. So I side with the Tucker Davidson half of the game right now, just because he's cheap and the Mets are so banged up. And then as for the Braves side, we don't know who's starting for the Mets. So this is an issue we have. Let's see, how many teams do we not have starters for right now? It is, so we have no starter for the Marlins.
Miami.
We talked about them. Mm-hmm. No starter for the Mets. We have no starter for the Blue Jays. And are those all the teams? We have no starter for the Diamondbacks. So right there, we have a handful of teams we don't have starters from. So certainly the Braves have a potent offense. I assume the Mets bullpen is going to be a little shorthanded, because keep in mind, they've had a bunch of pitcher injuries as of late. We saw Reed Foley come out and pitch, was it four innings yesterday or something like that? He pitched really well in the time he was on the mound. But now the Mets bullpen is decimated because they had to dip into that yesterday. Mm-hmm. So if this is going to be a bullpen game for the Mets, I assume it's going to be a good spot for the Braves. And I think it's a team I'm going to want to get to. I just don't know what the Mets plans are right now.
No, I think Joey Lucchesi is going to be throwing a lot of innings tonight, whether he's good or not. And that's a pretty good opportunity to look at if you're the Atlanta Braves, but we'll see how it all comes together. But you're right. I mean, they've thrown a lot of innings out of that bullpen of late, 6 innings yesterday. And, Sean Reed Foley's not going to be in that mix. For you new Awesemo Plus users, this is the season. And there's a lot happening. You got, as we mentioned, baseball, basketball, hockey, golf, all happening at the same time. You could pick up your first month of Awesemo Plus Platinum for 25% off just by using promo code GOLDRUSH. That's promo code GOLDRUSH. It's one word, all caps, and it'll give you full access to all the premium content and tools on Awesemo.com, including player projections, ownership projections, our premium Slack channel, lineup builder, and much, much more. You don't want to miss this one. This offer is valid through May 20th, so you got 2 more days. If you want to play the PGA Championship, get in before that. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. Boston, Toronto next up from Dunedin, which means home runs are a possibility here. Good pitching matchup, though. Eduardo Rodriguez, Hyunjin Ryu. You look at Rodriguez, his ERA is over 4, but his peripherals are in line, if not better, than what he put up in a terrific season in 2019.
Yeah, so I mean, the other thing we have to mention here, because it was brought up in chat, is the Blue Jays have not officially named a starter yet. It's expected to be Hyun-Jin Ryu, except no officially named starter. For the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to assume that it's Ryu. And there's definitely some numbers that are a little concerning with him. Not anything that would make him a bad pitcher or anything like that, but he has a 2.95 ERA, all good, 3.48 expected ERA. So he's probably been a little bit lucky this year. He's a 288 BABIP. He also has a pretty high 80% strand rate. He's also giving up a little bit more fly balls this year. His home run to fly ball rate is up to 13.5%. And then looking at his batted ball numbers, let's see what I could find there. He's getting barreled up 7.8% of the time, which is by far the most of his career. The highest it had ever been before was right around 6%. Last year only gave up 3.2% of balls against him were barreled up. This year, like I said, 7.8%. So it does seem like Ryu's giving up a little bit more hard contact. And then also you consider that that park that we've talked about so much. And I think we have to assume that outside of Coors Field, I consider this to be the second most favorable hitters park in baseball. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. It's just home runs, but that's what you're searching for in fantasy. Even if it doesn't inflate the run total of a game as much as Coors Field will, if you're getting a ton of home runs there, I mean, you're boosting big time. And that's, it's a great spot for one-offs as well, where you don't necessarily have to stack Boston or Toronto, but you throw Bo Bichette or Marcus Semien or Vladimir Guerrero, and you're capable of getting 20-plus points from one of those guys.
And so with Boston, obviously it's not an ideal matchup, but Boston's had a really good offense this year. Ryu is giving up more hard contact than we've seen in the past. And just this ballpark is ridiculously favorable for hitters. So yes. I look at the Red Sox right now projected for 1.9% ownership as a stack. And I think it's a team to take advantage of with low ownership with potential upside just because of mainly this ballpark more than anything else, because we've seen some really wonky results here. This is not a major league ballpark. This is a ballpark that's built for minor league games, and we've seen some ridiculously high scoring games where it's like, this game was a 9-7 game and there was 6 home runs hit. Like, we've seen all kinds of wonky results. So for that reason, whenever I see teams that have really low ownership in these games, I want to take stabs on it. We have Boston as the team with the 4th most likely to be the top scoring team on the slate. Toronto we have as the team 3rd most likely to be the top scoring team on the slate, and both of them have really positive leverage scores. The Red Sox in our top stack score, the most positively leveraged team on the slate. So the matchup against Ryu is not the best in the world, but everything else about the situation is so favorable. And then, like you said, the home run upside, I'm definitely willing to go to Boston.
And with that, I'm looking at Ryu's numbers and see as a 2.95 ERA. And I'm like, man, that's pretty impressive to be able to do that if you're throwing half your games at Dunedin. However, he hasn't thrown half his games at Dunedin. Only one of his starts has come there in Florida. So for Hyun-Jin Ryu, as good as he's been this year, he's done the vast majority of that on the road. So it's not as if he's got it all figured out at this ballpark and someone that you have to be afraid of or something along those lines.
Yeah, and his only start when he pitched at home did go well, but like you said, we're considered to be a ridiculously favorable ballpark for offenses, and he's made 7 starts this year just by the luck of the draw. 6 of them have come on the road. So let's see how he pitches at home. I would feel differently if Boston was a popular team, but they aren't. So 14-game slate, I think there's a lot of ways to get contrarian. The Red Sox are one of those ways.
White Sox, Twins in Minnesota. This was the game to have. You had to be up on Denny Mendick yesterday in order to get things done and had the big grand slam. I guess you didn't have to have him. Laris Garcia ended up being the guy on Fanduel at shortstop for the Chicago White Sox. What'd you make of the big at bat yesterday? Yermin Mercedes taking Astudillo deep. You got some husky fellas going at each other and a 3-0 swing for a chalk catcher, as it turned out, probably swung some big money around late last night.
Yeah, I couldn't have been more disappointed because of I got basically nothing right yesterday. And the White Sox, they were projecting for so much ownership. And generally when an offense is that popular, it's just not a situation I'm going to be on. It wasn't that I thought it was a bad spot for the White Sox. I just thought, hey, there's no way this team actually has an 18% chance. I think that was the projected ownership, if I remember correctly, the 18% chance of the 18% ownership share yesterday. And I was like, I just don't roster a team that highly generally as a stack. obviously, in hindsight, I wish I just only had rushed for the White Sox and nobody else, but not necessarily the way I go with my process. And then just absolutely, they came out and stamped, like you said. We had Yermi Mercedes homering off of Astudillo. Does it bother you when somebody swings 3-0? I think it's so much ado about nothing.
Honestly, if you're going to throw a bullshit position player on the mound, you could eat it. I don't want to hear anything. If you're waving the white flag and giving up to the degree that that's what you decide to do, I mean, it should be batting practice for everybody. Green lights all around. I'm sick of that. It used to be fun when like Wade Boggs did it once a career. We've seen Astudillo on the mound at least twice so far this season. We're like a month and a half in. I mean, it's not even like the dog days of the summer where you bullpen. You got 13 guys, pitchers on all these rosters now. It's ridiculous when you have to go to a position player now. And yeah, you should absolutely eat it when that happens.
You don't like how quick Astudillo works, though? He's out there. Did you take note of that? Where he just gets the ball, he just tosses it right back to the catcher. Like he just gets it, he tosses it, he gets back, catches it, tosses it back. Like there's no, he's just lobbing it over the plate and just being like, let's be done with this.
Because he's given up. Yeah, it's ridiculous. He's not trying to be a competitive pitcher. He's trying to get the game over with. It's just. It's lame. I'm over it. I'm over it. If we're going to have 14,000 pitching changes a game and 13 guys, pitchers available for this, how are you possibly throwing a position player at all? Ridiculous.
Yeah, and I see producer Tyler's messaging that the home run he gave up, it was 47 miles per hour. That was so he's just lobbing it, like he just does it, and they shouldn't care at that point. But I think it's funny the announcers were just so bent out of shape about it. Like he shouldn't be swinging in that situation. It's like, really, it's like, what are we doing here? Like what does it matter? I mean, I would have preferred the
old baseball thought.
I would have preferred if he didn't do it, also just for my fantasy purposes. But I don't actually care for he swings 3-0, go for it. He hits home runs. Tatis hits grand slams and 3-0 counts. Who cares? Go the playing baseball.
Like if you're giving up, I don't want to hear you can't swing 3-0. You got position player on the mound over it. But it should be theoretically a different kind of game tonight. You got Lance Lynn, who's been very good for Chicago this year, going up against Michael Pineda. Now, Lance Lynn is like quietly a very good pitcher. I mean, he's been top 6 AL Cy Young Award voting over the last 2 seasons. And this year his strikeout rate's up to 11.4 per 9 innings. He's not given up a lot of home runs. He hasn't gone deep his last few outings, but it's not as if he's limited. He went 111 pitches last time out and still ended up scoring a lot of points because he struck out 9. Tougher matchup against Minnesota, though.
Yeah, so let me pull up some of these numbers really quick with Lance Lynn. So one thing that's always nice about Lance Lynn is we've generally seen him be a guy who has a little bit of a rubber arm and is willing to, number one, he's willing to work deep into games. And also we've seen managers, typically for whatever reason, there seems to be more of a leash with Lance Lynn being allowed to work deep into games than we've seen with a lot of other starting pitchers. So Lance Lynn, in his last start, he went fairly deep into the game. If I remember correctly, went over 7 innings. We've seen him pitch a complete game shutout this year. It was only 5. Oh no, last game was 5 innings. Earlier in the year, though, he had a 9-inning complete game shutout. But the one thing that gives me a little bit of pause with Lance Lynn is just his price tag in this spot. That in the matchup against the Twins isn't great. So the strikeout numbers are up for Lance Lynn, although for his career, he's generally not been, crazy high strikeout guy, strikes out less than a hitter per inning over the course of his career. And at 9,800 price tag on the road in Minnesota, I understand Minnesota's been a little bit disappointing this year, but on the whole, I would still expect this to be a good offense going forward. I don't think this offense is going to, continue to completely suck. The Twins have the worst record overall in the American League. If you look at Minnesota, their WRC plus against right-handed pitching this year, it's less than expected, but a lot of their struggles, they have a 104 WRC plus. A lot of their struggles have come from the pitching side as opposed to the hitting side. And I think there's just other guys I'd rather pay up for than Lance Lynn. I would rather get to Blake Snell. I'd rather get to Zach Wheeler. I'd rather get to Brandon Woodruff. So with that in mind, it's just going to make it hard for me to prioritize Lance Lynn. I think there's better options on the board.
How about Michael Pineda? Look, you're going up against the Chicago lineup that we saw. It was everybody getting it on the act yesterday. And Pineda has had some issues with the long ball of late, giving up 6 homers over his last 4 starts.
Yeah, and Pineda's somebody who I think has been heading for regression for a while now. So Pineda, it's just the steady decrease in fastball velocity since 2016. Shoulder injury, he's had an elbow injury. He also had a PED suspension in there. So here's his fastball velocity now over the last 5 years. Went from 94.7 when he was back with the Yankees, then went to 93.9, 92.6, 92.1. And now he's all the way down to 91.3, by far the lowest fastball velocity of his career. He's 32 years old, so it's not super old by any means, but you consider the mileage on his arm at this point, the injuries, and then also the PED suspension, the overall decrease in arm talent, it seems to be an issue for him. And while he does have a 2.79 ERA this year, he has a 4.35 expected ERA, a 4.57 FIP. So there's a lot to suggest that regression is coming. He has a 216 BABIP. That's not sustainable. An 89.9% left on base percentage. That's not sustainable. So he's benefited from a lot of favorable sequencing. So going forward, I think we're going to see Pineda start to become more of a middle of the rotation pitcher. So give me more of the Minnesota side of the game than of Pineda. No interest in Pineda for me. And Twins only project for 1.6% ownership as a team. I think that's a number to be overweight to the field on.
All right, regression for Pineda. We'll get to maybe some progression in our next game coming up in a second. But as you guys know, one of the biggest edges you can find in sports betting, you got to shop to find the best line. You can do your research and have 16 tabs open on Google Chrome to find the best thing, or use Awesemo's Odds Shopper. Does it all one place, nice and easy to see. It gives you the lines available on the game, the player prop that you're betting on, and you find which house the best place to go and try to find that edge. So you can head on over to oddsshopper.awesemo.com, where we compile the best bets available for game lines, player props, player and team futures, and it's all updated in real time. Next up, Patrick Corbin, Zach Davies. In April, it looked like both these guys might be headed to the minors at some point. They've actually both pitched a lot better over the last 3 outings and in this month of May. So Corbin, he dropped his ERA from 10.5, and it's now at 6+. And then Davies was up at 9.5, and he's dropped it below 6 now. Is there some momentum behind these two guys to even consider a Corbin or a Davies tonight against some not so spectacular offenses?
All right, so Patrick Corbin was good in his last start against Phillies. Like, no doubt. He pitched 7 innings, 9 strikeouts, no walks, a tough Phillies offense. Very impressive. He was very lucky his starts before that. Against the Yankees, he pitched 6 innings, 2 strikeouts, no walks. Against the Marlins, he only gave up 2 runs, but he had 4 walks and 4 strikeouts. So I'm looking at what happened in Patrick Corbin's last start as more of an aberration. I still think he's probably most likely washed. Now, does that mean he's going to continue to have an ERA over 6 for the rest of the season? No, probably not. Zips hasn't projected with a 4.45 ERA going through the rest of the season. But I mean, for this year, 6.19 ERA, 6.6 expected ERA. His strikeouts are way down. His walks are up. So this is the least amount of strikeouts he's ever had per 9 innings in his career, the most walks. He's also giving up a ton of hard contact, 27.8% home run to fly ball rate. So for sure, I was on the Phillies in Corbin's last start. That went poorly, but that can't make me just jump on Corbin here. Everything I'm seeing from him suggests that he's just not a good pitcher anymore.
Jump on the Cubs.
Yeah, and I think the Cubs. It's funny because it's not quite the same situation they had last night because John. It's somewhat similar. Definitely a lefty who had a lot of luck this year, and John Lester. There was still some name value there, so people didn't really want to get to the Cubs offense that much. I was on the Cubs offense. That looked like it was going to go well early in the day until just the White Sox just blew everybody out of the water, and it didn't matter who else I had stacked. But I think the Cubs offense did find success last night against John Lester, and I think it could find similar success tonight against Patrick Corbin. So in the interest of me continually trying to find these offenses who are not the Rays that have a chance of success, that have a lower ownership share, we have the Cubs in what seems to be a pretty favorable matchup against Patrick Corbin. Only project for 1.6% ownership as a team. There's positive leverage there. So no interest in Patrick Corbin, and then the Cubs are another team that I'm going to be overweight to the field on.
Davies, these last 3 starts, I think one of them was a really good outing against the Pirates. As much as that counts, it does as far as his major league numbers go, I guess. But, is there anything about Davies of late that makes you say maybe he's starting to figure it out a little bit?
No, not really. And the other thing too is The difference between him and Corbin is Corbin used to legitimately be a really good top end starting pitcher. Like I think the deal that Corbin got with the Nationals, I'm pretty sure they're paying him over $100 million, and that seems like a disaster right now. But Zach Davies has never been quite that caliber of starting pitcher. He's always been middle of the rotation guy. He had one year where he just kind of got lucky and got a bunch of wins when he was with the Brewers. It was 2017. Where I guess that maybe a few years ago, people valued pitcher wins a little bit more than they do now. But you look at the year, sure, he had 17 wins, but then you look at 3.9 ERA, that's kind of middle of the road. And then you look at the underlying numbers, he had a 4.9 expected ERA that year. This year, 5.6 ERA, 6.6 expected ERA. So also doesn't really strike guys out. So not a very favorable fantasy pitcher. So definitely I'd rather side with the national side of the game. No interest in Davies as a pitcher. And the only thing that gives me a little bit of pause, the Nationals are somewhat popular today. So I'd rather get to some of the other teams that I consider with similar odds of success, but just have less ownership. So the Red Sox, sub 2% ownership. I brought up the Cubs before. They have sub 2% ownership. So I'd rather get to those teams than the Nationals, who are somewhat popular.
And producer Tyler telling us Patrick Corbin set to make $24 million this year, which might be a bargain considering that 20 of it's probably deferred until like 2040, knowing the way the Washington Nationals do things with their contracts there. Pirates, Cardinals. We kind of know exactly what John Gant is at this point. He's going to give you between 4 and 6 innings. He's been pretty good this year. I mean, he's got a sub 2 ERA. He strikes some guys out. He walks the ballpark, and that pitch count runs up real fast. At least a better matchup against Pittsburgh here.
Yeah, so I think you hit on the key point there, which is that Gant doesn't work very deep into games. So the issue being is that when we have a 14-game slate and there's a whole bunch of pitchers with upside, it's hard to think that John Gant has a legitimate chance to land in the optimal lineup because everything goes perfectly for him. Let's say doesn't give up any runs, striking guys out. If he's only going to go 5 innings, what's the legitimate upside there? He pitches perfectly in those 5 innings and scores 20, 21 fantasy points, which could be good for smaller slates. But for a slate this large, chances are that probably isn't good enough to end up in the optimal lineup. So no interest in John Gant for me. And then the Pittsburgh Pirates offense is poor enough to where I don't really want to roster them either. JT
Brubaker, he's been good, good for at least 14 DraftKings points in all of his starts so far this season. ERA of 2.5. There is some upside here against St. Louis.
Yeah. So it's also just an issue of there's a bunch of pitchers on the slate that I like more than Brubaker. He is only picking up 3% ownership right now. So that's certainly favorable, but there were slates earlier in the season where I got to him, but if I remember off the top of my head, it was because they were really weak pitching slates. And for today, there are not necessarily the best high-end pitching options, but there are a bunch of viable pitchers, and Brubaker also 7,600 now. So early in the season when I had interest in him, he was like in the 5,000 and 6,000 range. So now the price has caught up with him a little bit. And I think there's guys for cheaper that have a similar expected outcome for me, like Tucker Davidson, or I'd rather just pay up to be able to get to somebody, like a Blake Snell. I mean, there's only a 1,300 price gap on DraftKings between Brubaker and Snell, which that to me also isn't quite correct. So I don't think he's going to be in my player pool.
Next up, Yankees, Rangers. Jameson Taillon really struggled his last time out. He's got an ERA of 5.5. I think he's had one good start really this year, and that came against the Detroit Tigers. And then Mike Foltynewicz going for Texas. Both these guys are giving up more than 2 homers per 9 innings. They're in Texas. The over-under sitting there at 8.5. I would think this is a game that screams some runs.
All right, so Jameson Taillon, something that has been a little bit of a point for me over the last year or so is that pitchers who go from Pittsburgh to other teams find success elsewhere. And while that so far hasn't been the case for Taillon, there's some pretty favorable underlying numbers here. And certainly going up against the Rangers did not work out for me yesterday. Garrett Cole, of all pitchers, for any game for Garrett Cole to finally get blown up for the first time, really against the Texas Rangers, that was the team that did him in. But and not only that, he struck out the side in the first inning. And you were thinking at that point, all right, that just guaranteed 35, 40 fantasy points coming from Garrett Cole. And then it just the wheels came off so quickly. But so Jameson Taillon so far this year, he's a 5.4 ERA, but he has a 3.01 expected ERA. He's striking out 11.61 hitters per 9 innings. The walks are in check. What's really done him into this point has just been a pretty unlucky strand rate at 70%. Also, he's giving up an 18.6% home run to fly ball rate. I don't think that is what it should be, though. I think that he's been a little bit unlucky to give up quite that many home runs. He's giving up some hard contact for sure, 37.5%, although it is a little bit down from last year, 39.8%. But I mean, don't forget, Tyone for a while was one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. He's generating a bunch of swing and misses and strikeouts with the Yankees. So I'm actually on Tyone in this spot, going right back against the Rangers and hoping for slightly better results than I got yesterday. But Tyone 13.8% owned right now, projected on DraftKings. That's the number I'm going to be overweight to the field on. And then on FanDuel, Jamison Tyone only 7,100 and projected for 6% ownership. I think that's a pretty good contrarian play for a cheap price. So Tyone, I like the strikeout numbers. I like what everything looks like other than the ERA. So he's a good contrarian option to me.
It always seems the Yankees bats are either the highest leverage stack or the lowest leverage stack. How do you like them tonight against Mike Foltynewicz?
Yeah, so this is another spot where it looks like the Yankees are going a little bit over-owned. They are projected for the second most ownership on the slate, behind the Tampa Bay Rays. Now, with that said, the Tampa Bay Rays still have more than double the projected ownership of the Yankees, because the Yankees, while they are popular, it's just really hard to top the ownership projection for the Rays right now. So if I want to say one positive, the Yankees are at least more favorable from a leverage perspective than the Rays are. So the Yankees are a team that I would look at those numbers, and they're not over-owned to the point where I would take them out of my player pool. I would just be underweight to the field on them. Mike Foltynewicz has historically had some struggles against left-handed bats. Oh, the Yankees have a pretty right-hand heavy lineup, but Yankees a little banged up right now. I would be looking to favor whichever lefties make it into the Yankees order. Brett Gardner, he's been somebody who's hit near the top of the order at times, especially with Giancarlo Stanton now, so that's a possibility. So he's somebody who looks like a good value play on FanDuel and DraftKings.
Remember, get into our Awesemo Hall of Fame, right? Everybody wants to get there. You get top 3 in a tournament with over 5,000 contestants. You have the Awesemo avatar. Boom, you're in the Hall of Fame. You just got to tweet at Awesemo HOF. We love giving kudos. We love seeing people have success. And look, you get rewarded for it. You win a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. So look, that's a good place to be. Not where we were last night, but hey, you get in the winner's circle, put some roses around your neck, do the whole thing, give us a Hall of Fame speech, whatever you want to do. It's your day in the old Hall of Fame.
Yeah, for sure. And boy, this slate, I'm like looking at the upcoming games to talk about, and it's like this is never ending.
We still have a lot. I pride myself on ripping through these games and staying in check. And I'm like, man, we're only halfway through, and we've blown through almost 3/4 of the show. So we're gonna fly. Brewers, Royals. Chris Bubich is starting for Kansas City. He has the most unfortunate pitcher's name since Grant Balfour. Brandon Woodruff going there for Milwaukee. Woodruff, he belongs in that top tier category on a night like tonight, where he's got a 1.19 ERA if you throw out his first start of the season.
Yeah, Woodruff to me is actually the Brewers pitching rotation is absolutely absurd with the way Freddie Peralta is going. Obviously, Corbin Burns has pitched exceedingly well right now. He's in the MVP betting, not the MVP, Cy Young betting odds. He's slightly behind DeGrom and has picked up a little bit of space now that DeGrom is injured. But I mean, you just look at this rotation; it's ridiculous between Woodruff, Peralta, and Burns, and it seems like they're all one-upping each other constantly, where you're just like, you're like, Corbin Burns is the best pitcher, is one of the best pitchers in the league, and then you start to think like, is Woodruff better than him though? And then Freddie Peralta goes out and throws like 7 shutout innings with 8 strikeouts, and be like, well, Freddie Peralta only throws 2 pitches and nobody could hit him, so that's pretty impressive. But yeah, Woodruff, really favorable matchup against the Kansas City Royals today, and you just look at how unhittable he's been and matches the eye test too. Everything looks good on paper with the numbers. Everything looks good just based on the eye test. So Woodruff to me is a pretty high priority spend up option. Based on the ownership, right now we have Woodruff projected for less than half the ownership of Blake Snell. I'd rather have more exposure to Woodruff than Snell at those kind of numbers. Woodruff is a little bit more expensive, but I don't even know. But Woodruff isn't so unhittable this year that I don't even know if the matchup matters, even though it's not like it's a bad one against the Royals. I think that his stuff is so good that he's almost matchup proof at this point. I mean, Woodruff this year, he has scored, here's his fantasy point totals for the year. Since other than the opening day start, which didn't go well for him, but 31, 21, 27, 31, 17, 33, 33. So he's been over 30 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 starts. He's been over 27 in almost all of them. So Woodruff, definitely a high priority to me, and I'd rather get more exposure to him than Blake Snell just based on the current ownership.
How about Chris Bubich on the other side? Minimum price on DraftKings. He hasn't started this year, but he has thrown as many as 80 pitches out of the bullpen. So he is capable of giving you 5 innings. How do you like, really, I guess it's compared to, what Atlanta is doing tonight.
Yeah, I'm a little wary of him. He's even though he threw 80 pitches, we've seen him throw as many as 80 pitches. The strikeouts are down this year. He's only striking out 7.11 hitters per 9 innings. He also is walking a ton of guys. He's walking about 5 hitters per 9 innings. So we're looking at somebody who's walking nearly as many guys as he's striking out. And then you also consider that maybe they're trying to stretch him out coming out of the bullpen. And yet for the price point, if you want to take a few stabs on him, because he's 4,000, it doesn't take that much to be a value on DraftKings at that cheap of a price point. I'd rather roster Tucker Davidson, though, just based on the difference in projected ownership right now. We'll see what this ends up being. But Bubich right now is projected for 3% ownership. Tucker Davidson is projected for 0.2% ownership. So obviously both of them are contrarian plays, but Tucker Davidson even more so. And I think Davidson, that matchup against a really depleted Mets offense, is probably more favorable than it looks like. I know the Brewers offense has been terrible this year, but Bubich, despite a 1.42 ERA, I suspect he's not all that good.
As for our next game, Angels and then Cleveland, Zach Plesac coming off a no-hit attempt against the Mariners. Still didn't put up a lot of fantasy points in that game because he ended up giving up a couple of runs, didn't have a whole lot of strikeouts, but likely gets an Angels lineup that will be without Mike Trout.
Yeah, I assume that have you seen any updates on Trout?
No, I just know he left with a calf strain. He threw his helmet when he went into the dugout. It looked like something where he's not going to come back and play the next day. I'd have to think they'd be cautious with Mike Trout, even if it's not an IL.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And also because we've seen them be, fairly cautious with him over the last couple of years. It seems like it has been a mandate from the front office. They don't want him to steal as many bases. We've seen that way down over the last couple of years, especially ever since it was the thumb injury he had sliding into second, stealing a base a couple of years ago. And they're just like, hey, stolen bases, obviously it adds value. That's great. But if you're going to get injured doing this, it certainly takes a lot more away from the team than you stealing bases at a slightly plus EV clip. So I tend to agree also. I think they're going to be cautious with Trout. He probably gets held out of tonight's game. But even with that said, this is a good Angels offense. They still have Anthony Rendon in there, Shohei Ohtani, who's hitting the last couple of home runs. He hit a 95-mile-per-hour fastball at his eyes over the right field wall. Then he hits at Fenway. He hits a ball off his shoe top over the green monster in Fenway. So Ohtani now leads baseball in homers, and Angels offense is not one that I'm going to want to be rostering pitchers against really with any regularity this season.
I'm stealing somebody's tweet, but I don't remember who it was, but they just throwing out some of the stats. You have Ohtani up there in home runs with Acuna and everybody else leading the league in homers. And then he's also tied with Max Scherzer in ERA. It's a pretty ridiculous combo as we've seen all year. How about Andrew Heaney? He's got an ERA up around 5, but he's striking out a ton. And when he's good, he's really good. He's gone over 30 points on DraftKings 3 times this year.
Yeah, so this is a situation with Andrew Heaney where the price point is definitely favorable at 7,800, and I think there's definitely upside there. I'm a little aware of the ownership, though. So he's projected right now for 24.5% ownership. For context, I just said I like Brandon Woodruff a lot. We have Woodruff projected for 23% ownership. So while Heaney himself, I think a lot of people are going to get to him because, he's a little bit too cheap. There's a lot of strikeout upside there. I just think that he's getting owned a little bit too much by the field, and there's other pitching options that I would rather get to. Certainly, if I'm paying up for somebody like Brandon Woodruff, that makes more sense to me. Or if I'm just going really cheap and going with somebody like Bubich or Davidson, those are guys at min price. So I don't know how much exposure I really want to a lot of these guys in the 7-8K range. And also, I like Jameson Taillon more than I like Andrew Heaney. We have him projected for more fantasy points. Taillon's $400 cheaper, and he's picking up about half the ownership. So I think Taillon's a good pivot from Heaney, and Heaney right now we have as the 3rd most popular pitcher on the slate.
We got 4 games left, 10 minutes to play with here. Astros, A's, Christian Javier, not very highly owned. He has struggled this month, and the walks have been an issue. 8 walks in 17 and a third innings his last 3 starts, all coming in the month of May. And then Sean Manaea, who got batted around big time his last time out for the A's. I think that was at Fenway. He gets the start for Oakland.
Yeah, so Javier is in play for me. But with that said, I prefer Woodruff. I prefer Snell. I even prefer Zach Wheeler. So Javier, it's a somewhat tough matchup against the pretty tough matchup against the Houston Astros. There's a lot of power upside there. And then the underlying numbers for Christian Javier do suggest there's going to be a little bit of regression coming. He only has a 221 BABIP this year. So that's a pretty lucky number. He's going to eventually let more guys get on base against him. He's also somebody who has had about an 80% strand rate. So a couple of things are happening here. Number one, he's getting lucky with batting average on balls in play. More of those are going to lead to hits. And the guys that he's actually let on base this year, they've been scoring at a lesser rate than they actually probably should be. So put all that together, I expect there's going to be some more runs coming for Christian Javier in the future. His strikeouts this year are way up, but I'm a little wary of that too, because they're significantly different than they were last year. Last year started about 8.94 hitters per 9 innings. This year, 10.42. And I'm not sure that is really reliable, that we should expect him to continue to get that many strikeouts going forward. So with that in mind, Christian Javier, pretty low priority starting pitching option.
Manaea, I wouldn't think he's in the mix at all. Maybe offensively, do you like Houston, Oakland much in this game?
Yeah, I'd rather. I have a little bit of interest in Houston as a contrarian stack. Sean Manaea has been really inconsistent, especially ever since coming back from a shoulder injury. And if you look at Houston, they are a team that we have with the second best leverage odds on DraftKings right now. Only the Red Sox are better because Houston, we have a 4% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate, but 0.8% projected ownership. So this is another one of those teams. We're looking at sub 2% ownership with like 4 to 5% chance of being the top stack on the slate. We have a handful of them. Those are the teams that I'm going to be building around tonight. And also, like I said before, there's not some massive salary crunch with the starting pitcher options. There's a couple of 4,000 salary pitchers that I think are viable. The most popular pitching option overall is Blake Snell at 8,900 on DraftKings and 8,000 on Fanduel. So with that in mind, this isn't the slate where I'm dying to spend up for Garrett Cole again. So I'm more apt to spend up for offenses, and the Astros look like one of the more sensible contrarian options to that with.
D-backs, Dodgers, Merrill Kelly, and then who I wouldn't think would be much in play here, and then Julio Urias, solid pitcher, ERA a touch over 3. He's a guy who has some upside, but based on what you've said, probably not in that. There are other options in that class that he's in.
Yeah, and I think the biggest issue with Urias is just pitch count, because I really like him as a pitcher, but here I have his pitch counts in front of me right now. Here are his last 5 outings: 88 pitches, 87 pitches, 90 pitches, 76 pitches, 87 pitches. So with that in mind, he's actually been really efficient, been able to go 7 innings in a couple of those starts. But in general, if he's throwing 75 to 85 pitches, I can't expect him to go more than 5 or 6 innings reliably. He's also fairly expensive tonight. So I'd rather pay up for some of the other pitching options we have on the slate. There's a bunch of guys in this price range that I just think make for better plays than him. Brandon Woodruff for sure, Zach Wheeler, Blake Snell. So it's not really a knock on Urias. It's just I think there's better options to go to.
Let's jump in on Snell. He's the number 1 pitcher tonight. He hasn't pitched out of the 6th inning yet this season. I mean, no. He hasn't been very good. He maxed out at 22.9 DraftKings points in the opener. I mean, you're really just picking against the Rockies, I think. What do you make of what's happening with Snell, even if it's a nice-looking price, if he hasn't quite been the pitcher in San Diego that he was in Tampa Bay?
All right. So first and foremost, I think we have to look at the Colorado Rockies. Just they've had such a bad offense away from Coors Fields really for forever, but especially in the last 7 to 8 years. This is an offense we take them away from altitude, away from that really favorable hitting environment, and they've really struggled. And Blake Snell, this hasn't been the same pitcher we've seen in previous years, but there's so much of a track record for success from Blake Snell, former Cy Young winner, and it's not like he's totally getting crushed. He's a 4.19 ERA, so it's higher than we expect for Blake Snell, but it doesn't make him a bad pitcher overall. And
it's been the walks.
It's been the walks. He's walking 6.29 hitters per 9 innings. Now, here's the favorable point here is even though he's walking a lot of guys, he's striking out 12.84 hitters per 9 innings. So if he just starts throwing more strikes, the strikeouts are still going to be there. He's always had ridiculous stuff, and he's always striking guys out. And it's not like his stuff has taken a step back. He actually has a 95.5 mile per hour fastball velocity average this year. So that's slightly up for his 95.2 career average. So I assume they're going to figure out the walk situation eventually. And also him pitching in the National League, that should just buoy his that should boost his fantasy output anyways. He's facing a pitcher instead of a DH. And you would think that he'd be able to start striking out these pitchers and not walking them. He's walked pitchers a couple of times this year. But overall, I expect that they're going to figure out the command sooner rather than later. I believe in just the overall talent of Blake Snell and how good we've seen him be in the past. So Snell, favorable price point. I don't know that I'm going to get to him quite as much as the field as he's in 50% of lineups right now, but even so, I have him in the initial build I did for this morning. I'm in 45% of my lineups. So that makes him my most rostered pitcher, but just kind of even with the field right now. And then how much I get to him is going to depend on where his ownership ends up.
So you like Snell more than Woodruff tonight? Would those be your top two at least?
They are my top two. The difference though right now is that I'm overweight to the field on Woodruff and underweight to Snell. Even
though you have more Snell than Woodruff in
although that's also
lineups.
just on the initial build I do just for the purposes of this show. But yeah, it's as early. It stands right now though, if I was to actually sit down and work out my lineups to what I wanted them to be, I would have more exposure to Woodruff.
Austin Gomer, I'm only going to throw him out because San Diego's kind of playing with half a lineup these days. Worth talking about or no?
It's worth talking about from a standpoint of that I think he's bad enough to the point that the Padres are generally in a good spot if it wasn't for the ownership also. It's a team we have right now for 7.2% projected ownership and only a 2.9% chance of being the top scoring team on the slate. So it's just overall in the context of looking at the other offenses that have a similar percentage outcome of being the top scoring team. We have the Padres project for 7.2% ownership, and then there's a bunch of other teams that we have projected for slightly higher odds of being optimal that also have, 1 to 2% ownership. So a lot of pivots I could get to, and the Padres are going to be a team that as of right now at these numbers, I wouldn't have in my player pool.
Wrap it up with the Tigers and the Mariners, Spencer Turnbull, Justin Dunn. Jared Kelenic still sitting there at like $2,900 salary on DK, and he's hit home runs. He's batting leadoff for Seattle, and Turnbull's got some pretty good stuff, but not a pitcher to shy away from.
Yeah, so Kelenic is, I assume, going to end up being super popular. He isn't right now, and if that actually holds true through to lock, he's only projected for 12% ownership right now. If that's the case,
a lot less than yesterday.
Yeah. He only is 1 hit in his last 3 games. Maybe that scared people off a little bit. But, if we just look at the overall outlook on Kelenic going forward, somebody who, by the way, the Mets traded him for Robinson Cano, and now Kelenic, one of the best young hitting prospects in baseball.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah. But just given what the price is right now and the fact that the ownership is in check, he's somebody to be overweight to the field on. I think he looks like one of the better value hitters overall on the slate, and it's a pretty favorable matchup that he has tonight. The pitchers on both sides of this game are not particularly great. So we have Seattle. They have a 6.8% chance of being the top value stack on the slate. Not that doesn't make them a massive priority for me though, just because, like I said, there aren't that many pitchers I'm really looking to pay up for. But Kelenic as a one-off is definitely a priority for me.
And certainly you guys want to stay up to date on the latest MLB DFS news with our Awesemo MLB handle. Our guy News God delivers starting lineup confirmations. If Mike Trout's going to be in that lineup, obviously a big one tonight. Injury updates, late scratches are all there before lock. So be sure to give a follow at Awesemo MLB. And you can check out News God's Twitter as well at NewsGod with a Z _ DFS. Of course, like and subscribe our videos here. Set the alerts so you know when we're going live. We've got MLB Big Board, PGA ownership, NHL player and stack rankings, MLB ownership rankings, all free on the site. So just to encapsulate everything again, Snell, Woodruff, who you like at the top of the board, Atlanta starting pitchers, name escapes me, but he's 4,000 and has a good matchup against what's left of the New York Mets there. Tucker Davidson. All right, not ringing any bells for me as far as anything else. But and then we do have some weather to keep an eye on. 3 games that you're going to want to check out as far as that goes. And Tampa Bay, look, they might score a ton of runs tonight, but everybody's kind of on them against Matt Harvey.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not gonna tell anybody that the Rays are in a bad spot because they clearly aren't. I just don't think they warrant having 2 times the ownership plus of every other team on the slate.
We got a ton still coming up here on Awesemo's YouTube channel at 1 Eastern, an hour from now. The PGA Strategy Show, a couple of days to get ready for the PGA Championship. We got the MLB Deeper Dive at 3, and maybe we'll know some more probable pitchers for that game. Also, the tip-off at 4, and NBA shows beginning at 4:55 Eastern time as you have the play-in games beginning tonight in the Eastern Conference. Our thanks to Odds Shopper Greg Ehrenberg getting it done on the other side there. Producer Tyler. I'm PeteyMac. Happy stacking.